Everybody, thank you so much for participating in this webinar. I'm Dr. Michael Brown, the president of the Missouri Association of Osteopathic Physicians and Surgeons. And I have here with us today Jason Haxton, the director of the A.T. Still Museum over at A.T. Still in Kirksville, Missouri. He's going to give a little bit more introduction to himself. But I just want to welcome all of you to our, we're calling this a fireside chat here, just an opportunity to have some CME, but more in a fun way, learning something about our history, learning about our roots. And so I think this is going to be very interesting. We're going to be learning this from, we can't just put any physician in charge of teaching this knowledge. We had to bring in the only expert that I know of on this subject in the world. And so I'm excited to have Jason here. Do you want to say a little bit about yourself, Jason, and introduce yourself to everybody here?
Well, thanks, Dr. Brown. Well, I've been running the museum for 20 years now, so probably I know as much about Dr. Still and all of the osteopaths from historical perspective because I've been doing it every day, and that's my job. And so I just got off giving a 2-hour lecture to Argentina. Yesterday it was Italy, a couple of days ago, London. So we're actually doing these CMEs around the world to various osteopathic healthcare professionals. So I really do enjoy them. And after you watch this, if you have Facebook, you can go ahead and join me on Facebook. It's just Jason Ross Haxton, and you'll see that 4,000 of my friends are Brazilians. Brazilians love Facebook. So you can be the few that are non-Brazilian. But I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Brown.
Well, thank you very much. And just some little logistics about this meeting here. You all have access to the chat panel. So if you would like to ask a question, please, in the chat there, just kind of type in your question, and we'll see about incorporating that into our conversation. We're just having a casual conversation back and forth here between Jason, myself, and then you as well. So please feel free to enter in a question in the chat or anything that you find interesting, and we'd love to hear your comments and feedback as we go. So with that, let's kind of get right into it. Jason has such a wealth of knowledge, and I've never heard him repeat himself or a story yet. So apparently we're, we haven't tapped him out yet. So before delving into kind of the osteopathic medicine and its history with during pandemics, I wanted to start off with a little bit of osteopathic history and trivia just to kind of set the stage, and maybe have you share with us some of the knowledge about our roots we might not know. And I know that there's an incident or something that you can tell us that stands out when it comes to discovery of osteopathic medicine, Jason. So do you want to share that with us?
Well, yeah, well, Dr. Browning, as you mentioned, we're just having a casual conversation because that was how Dr. Still loved to teach. If you're telling stories and you're getting people involved, they tend to remember the facts. But if we start talking in very technical anatomy terms, you're going to get tired, your head's going to start to nod, and you're going to fall asleep. And Dr. Still says, if I tell stories, people listen, they stay close, and they learn the point. And that's what I'm after. So we're going to give you some fun stories with some excellent points. So beginning with talking about Dr. Still and what might be some of the early and I'm sharing our screen right now. Here's Dr. Still, and this is before he started the school. He's got a femur in a hand and a pelvis. He didn't know how to explain what he was doing, so he just carried a bag of bones, and he would show people kind of, here's where your hip is, here's where your femur is, here's what I'm going to do, so you can kind of be part of your healing process, like doctors do today. And
hey,
so
Jason, I don't see that shared yet. Do you mind sharing that again with us?
Oh, let me say share screen. Share screen. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Now, here we go. Is that good?
Yeah, there we go.
So here's Dr. Still, as I mentioned with, I'm sorry about that. I do these all the time. I should be much better. So here's Dr. Still with the femur and the pelvis. So thanks. Michael's going to keep me honest. If I'm telling you there's something there and it's not, we'll find out. But again, this was when he was just traveling the countryside and trying to demonstrate and get people excited about osteopathic healthcare. Of course, a person carrying around a human bones in a bag would be a little suspect even today. Imagine during his time. But when we talk about interesting incidents, the story of osteopathic healthcare really begins when A.T. Still was about 10 or 12 years old. He remembers suffering from a migraine headache, and it was migraine because his stomach was sick, and he had these all of his life. he couldn't get comfortable. And the only place he could really rest was the base of his skull. So he takes this rope and he hangs it from 2 tree branches, throws a blanket to kind of soften that hard twine, and he rests his head. And he says that swaying and lifting kind of relieve the tension in his muscles from the headache, and the blood flow in the occipital muscle area nerves. It slowed the blood, which released the muscles around the nerves, and the headaches would go away. So he would rope himself whenever these headaches would come on. And so this is actually tells you that osteopathic medicine's discovery was a journey through Dr. Still's entire life. But another key piece, which kind of like there's a lot of things that happen, but what was interesting is why we have this. This is a very typical Missouri picture, at least up in Ari. I don't know if down in Jefferson City where MAOPS is at, but up in Kirksville, we still have people butchering hogs, and this is something you do in the winter time. And the reason this picture is significant is that Dr. Still had been called to a house, and he thought the woman there was pregnant because it was the child who came and got him. And he knows that when usually the children come, the husband stays, the wife's having a baby, and the kid wasn't really explicit as to what the problem was. It was just like, Dad said, come get you, Mom needs you bad, and you got to hurry. Well, AT still was thinking it's a pregnancy. He grabs his obstetric bag, he chases after the kid on the horse. They go miles and miles, and when he gets to the patient, she's not pregnant. She seems to be dying from pneumonia. She's coughing up mucus. She can hardly breathe. She's writhing. She's got a fever. She's sweating. She's basically dying. And AT still is looking at his bag of obstetric going, this isn't going to work. And so he right away goes to her chest area because breathing's an issue. And as he's checking her breathing, absentmindedly, his hand is going around her anatomy, and he gets to the side of her ribs, and he thinks, my gosh, all of her ribs are broken. But as he checks around, they're massively dislocated. And so he thinks this is going to be horribly painful. So he starts working, and he sets all the ribs back into place. And as soon as he finishes, she takes a deep breath and she relaxes. Her breathing starts to go to normal. The fever drops and she falls asleep. And AT still is like, well, she stabilized. That's good. So he goes to bed. And when he gets up in the morning, he can't find his patient. He's like, well, where is she? He's like, oh, frontier woman. She feels great. Winter's coming on. We got jobs. She's out there working. That's the way it is in Missouri. And he's like, wait a minute. You can't heal from pneumonia in 8 hours or 8 days or maybe 8 weeks. What happened? It's like, well, we were cleaning the pigs. We had 2 big hogs, and we'd finished the first and tied it off to the tree. And as we started to work on that second hog, the rope came loose, and that pig swang into her, and she fell backwards. And then everything went wrong. And it left a little blue mark, a contusion, a bruise. And AT still got to thinking, you mean the rib dislocation was causing symptoms that I equated to disease? And that it was actually structure? And as soon as the structure went back, the fever, the breathing, all the symptoms that I thought were disease went away, went back to normal. So for him, this was the first idea of structure first, and then we look for the disease aspect of all other things. And so it changed his complete way of thinking. So osteopathic healthcare was discovered by accident, but need is the mother of invention. And when you don't have what you need, you start becoming creative. So I think it's a fascinating kind of story there.
Oh, that's a really fascinating story, Jason. I appreciate that. It makes me, when you tell stories like that, I can see how my thinking and my thought process that was trained to me when I was a medical student, has evolved from that. But, we're always taught as medical students that, we should always try to find the original cause of what we're treating and not just to treat the symptoms. And if we can find that original cause and we can fix that, then the symptoms go away. So instead of my clinic being filled with, chest pains or coughs or colds, they might be filled with something else. They might be filled with rib injuries or something like that. And we have to look beyond the initial presentation. So it's amazing to hear how it all first started and where those ideas came to be.
Well, and this story actually is not in any of his books. It's only a student. He told students, he trusts students, and he wanted students to understand, medicine isn't perfect. So he tells his story to the students, and one of them writes it down, and we discover it in some students' notes. But you understand, if he were to admit this to the public, he would be admitting, I was an unprepared doctor. Well, look at him. He's, no good. So he had enough trouble. He didn't need detractors questioning how he came up with at least the premise. I mean, he understood the changes. He had to observe what was happening, but he felt that it was a little too much for the general public. But he does write in his book, Research and Practice, that a slipped rib will start to pool fluids and create the pulmonary issues that could be and lead to pneumonia. So he identifies the exact case. He just doesn't describe it as a pig who hits this woman when he made a mistake. And one other issue, while we were at our school not too long ago, there was a staff person who was talking to a group of applicants. And as they were getting to the end of their talk, they were in a dress, and so they had materials to hand out. Rather than what I would do is turn around, show my butt, and pick up the materials, she goes down on her knee. She scoops up the material. She's going to do this kind of waiter move. So she's picking, scooping, standing all at once. She stands up and she drops everything. She can't breathe. And right away, everybody thinks, well, they know something's wrong. So they run out and get the closest doctor. And the doctor comes in not knowing what's going on. All he sees is this person basically pounding on their chest, turning blue. He thinks they're choking. So he does the Heimlich. Well, we know there's nothing inside this person, but he doesn't know that, and he does it twice, and nothing happens. He thinks, by damn, I'll get it out of her, and he gives this blast, and he basically positions her back. She starts breathing, and so he stops, because once you're breathing, we've got some good movement. They think she's having a massive coronary heart attack, but what they discover is, in that weird twisting, she must have hit some parasympathetic nerve and cut off the breathing opportunities. And when he pops her, he relieves the nerves and she can breathe again. They take her over. There's no heart attack. Everything's fine. She's massively dislocated herself, and there wasn't even a pig. So to see something like this, it makes me understand exactly how this could have happened in modern terms.
Fascinating. Jason, do you mind sharing your screen there?
Oh, yeah. Let me go ahead back to stop for a little bit.
Bring us back together so people can see us chatting back and forth here. Perfect. So we got a question from someone that I'd like to know the answer to as well. Michael GDO says, do we know what time frame in his medical career that pig incident occurred? Where in his
so career? This incident happens in the winter time. Because the kid who comes up, what AT still describes in the story is it starts to snow, and it's a full blizzard by time, of course, Missouri could be April, but by the time he gets to the house, there's a full blizzard, and he can't go back. That's the reason he can't go back and get his medical bag. He says, had I had my medical bag, I'd have treated her for pneumonia. She probably would have died, and we'd have called it death by pneumonia. But we know it was winter time, and yet it's in June 22nd, 1874, he announces, I have come up with this premise of structure and how we can work with that in the body. So my hunch is it probably maybe happened in November, December, or January. And then he studies, after he learns this trick with this woman, he starts looking, he says, how many times did I treat people for disease? And it was structure. So he starts watching and starts analyzing his treatments. And by June, he's decided, this is it. I will never turn back. I am going forward on this attitude, first of health, and second, structure first. Right. And so in June 22nd, 1874, there was not a lightning bolt that hit him. It was the time to kind of finally process this situation. So I hope that helps.
No, it's great. And I think this story is going to lead into some of our discussions here about some of the techniques that were used when we were treating this Spanish influenza a little bit later on. And so to kind of move forward, kind of introducing that, I'm going to jump a little forward here. We want to talk tonight about osteopathic medicine and its history and its impact during epidemics. Now I know that A.T. Still himself, he was done practicing by the 1918 Spanish flu. He was, well done by then. So
Meaning he died in
yeah,
1917, just at
exactly.
the cusp.
just at the beginning of it. But were there epidemics during his lifetime that he faced, or large breakouts that were common during the time that he practiced?
True, he was familiar with, and they weren't quite as grand as our current pandemic, but when they were working with the Shawnee, when he had gone to Kansas to learn by apprenticeship, which, by the way, Dr. Still will never, ever be an MD. He had the opportunity to go to medical school, but when it came towards the end and he kept waiting to learn something more than bleeding, dosing, drugging, it's like, he goes, well, where's the medicine? He goes, oh, this is it. He goes, well, is this all we're going to learn? And they were like, well, yeah, this is modern medicine. And he goes, this is nothing. And he leaves. Now people are, well, why didn't he get the diploma? Because the diploma to him was worthless. Why would you get a diploma for something that is crazy in his opinion? So he apprenticed with his father. So he is a physician by apprenticeship. So his father teaches him, and that was legitimate. That, like learning any job, you stay with the doctor when he thinks you're smart enough, then you can go to the license bureau. He testifies, indeed, this person has trained and he's ready, and you get your physician and surgery license. So Dr. Still had his license through apprenticeship. And so what we see is when he's with his father, one of the diseases was called black tongue. And it was unique to the Shawnee Indian. It killed many of them, and was some type of bacteria, obviously, that was occurring with the native population. And other things that he saw was cholera. Now, interesting thing about cholera is we haven't seen an epidemic of cholera since Haiti's earthquakes. If you remember, suddenly we had 360 some odd Haitians die. And it's like, from cholera. And people are like, where did this come from? What they discovered was the Europeans that were coming to help were defecating in the waters, and the locals were drinking it, and they didn't have the immunities genetically that the Europeans had, and it produced a whole cholera epidemic. This is similar to the white men and women coming to the Shawnee Indians. They start defecating in the water supply. The Indians are drinking it. They come from the Bering Strait and possible Asian descent. They don't have the immunities, and they are affected more greatly. And so what we find is Dr. Still tried to deal with some of these issues, but it was kind of a losing battle.
Fascinating. So, maybe shifting gears and moving forward to that 1918 Spanish flu. So we know that the largest pandemic, and probably the first worldwide one that ever faced osteopathic medicine, was the 1918 Spanish flu, because we were still a very young profession at that time. How did this affect osteopathic medicine in general, this Spanish flu, just from a broad overview?
And I'm going to show us just a picture real quick so that we could once again
Sure.
go to my share the screen, and here we go. By the way, again, when Dr. Still started this little schoolhouse, and here he is, it was a fiasco. He was basically trying to work with the local doctors who were bleeding and poisoning, and it didn't work. So basically, he actually nearly shut down the school. And when we it's not going to let me do what I wanted to do.
We're
And
back.
so one of the things that it's see if you'll let me. There it is. And of course, we end up with and I hope it's letting me share. Are we sharing now?
Not yet.
Dr.
Not yet.
Oh, so this is one of the challenges of I have to tell it to let me share, and then I have to put it on, and now I have to share. Okay, so as we look at on the screen just real quickly, this little schoolhouse. I mean, and it still is at the museum in Kirksville today. Those that are graduates like Dr. Brown, they've seen this thing a million times. And
that's the building right there, huh?
That's the building. We don't have the basement anymore, and we've lost the porch, but it's still the same old building. And Dr. Still kept it to remind us of our small beginnings. But what we have here basically was he tried to teach the local doctors, but they were horrible. And so basically he thought, this is never going to work. And And then he comes across this man, Smith, who has a European background of anatomy and good schooling. And Smith is on the other side of the skeleton. We have Dr. Still in the middle, the skeleton Columbus, and of course Smith with the mustache, the rather swarthy, handsome-looking debonair guy. He had 7 years of the best European education in Scotland. Still today, the Royal College of Surgery is one of the top schools. So he comes with all this knowledge, and he is able to understand what Dr. Still's doing and explain it and give it credibility. So our profession may have died with A.T. Still had Smith not come and helped him build an institution and explain and build the confidence in what this frontier doctor who learned through apprentice, what it was kind of about. And so here we have Dr. Smith, who was really instrumental in helping A.T. Still thrive. But we're talking about World War I. So here we have hundreds of thousands, 100,000 army men in northern France. They're in these wet, cold, nasty foxholes. They've got their chickens. They've got the piggeries. You can see there's rabbits. They've got all these animals. And they're basically sharing their viruses. The soldiers are getting sick. The pigs are getting sick. The chickens are getting sick. Now, we're nothing like chickens. They're like reptiles. You know, there's a reason everything tastes like chicken. Snake, lizard, alligator, they're all nasty things. And so are chickens. They got these claws and scales that are their feathers, beaks, and eyes that don't match up. I mean, they're really kind of, weird things. No wonder everything tastes like chicken. Needless to say, we can't get a chicken virus, but we can get a pig virus, and a pig can get a chicken virus. So we've got this mixing pot of pig, chicken, and human, and we come up with the first bird flu, which we call the Spanish flu. And so there is no basically defense against this. And so the war really just grinds to a halt. So many people are ill, kind of like what's happening today. The war just stops and everybody goes home and they take the disease with them. And so this is how we get the first pandemic. Now, what's interesting is that osteopathic physicians were being discriminated against. So all the medical doctors go to the war and the osteopathic physicians stay home. Well, people start using them and they like them. They like their methods of treatment. And so when the doctors come back from the war, they realize this was a bad mistake because we've let them infiltrate into our ranks. And now they bring back this horrible flu. And right away, when someone's uncomfortable because they can't breathe and fever, the doctors are giving them morphine to calm them, which is the worst thing you can do. The osteopaths are saying, let the fever run. The fever is not the problem. It's treating, it's fighting disease. It's not the disease. Leave the fevers alone. So we're letting the fevers run their course, and we're doing rib raising, and we're putting people like in prone position. We're doing a lot of things they're doing today that are helping people to breathe while their immune system survives the disease. So it really was interesting that the combination war and this pandemic elevated because the osteopathic physicians, patients were living, and the doctors that were treating the fevers and using morphine were killing them off by the droves. So
that's fascinating, and it kind of ties in, that story that we started out with the woman that was healed through, what almost sounds like rib raising or rib techniques from AT
right.
Still. So kind of an interesting, a corollary there that, that
everything old can be used today. And that's what I'm saying, you can speak as a doctor on this, but have you been studying what they're doing with the prone position? One of the things they realize is place a person in the prone position. Can you explain the anatomy of that or whatever? I mean, obviously,
I don't think I'd be qualified just quite yet because we don't have all the evidence on that. But I will tell you this: at least they're thinking about form and positioning and structure as opposed to just giving that patient morphine.
Right, yes, which is the first instinct, and what we're finding though is that the pressure being off, by being not on your back but forward, it takes the pressure off the lungs.
Right.
It lets also there's more capacity for breathing.
Yeah.
And so what I was reading from the thing is from doctors was it's 100% effective. As soon as they do it, there's 100% benefit. And I thought, well, that's pretty bold to be saying stuff like that. But what they're saying is they can keep patients from going on ventilators, often using just something as simple. And this is what's funny. It's a simple thing, but if you understand anatomy, it makes sense.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's amazing. So we talked about how AT still wasn't treating patients, obviously, because he passed away during the Spanish flu. Who were
Right.
those osteopathic physicians of note during that time, and what was the relationship to Dr. Still?
Right. So probably the one that was, well, actually was the president of our school at the time. So AT Still dies in December of 1917, just as this pandemic is ready to take hold. And he leaves basically the school to his brother's grandson. So it's his great nephew, George Still. And his brother, James, and Summerfield, his nephew, have started the school in Des Moines. And basically this is their kid, and he's gone to Northwestern and he's gone to other schools. He hasn't just gone to the Kirksville school, but he's got a pretty good background. And when he comes and he sees what's happening with this flu, first thing he says is infectious diseases should not be mixed with surgical cases. And he actually separates the staff and pretty much into buildings. And, we laugh, he was like, I cannot believe that the doctors cannot figure out that to keep these infectious people, these flu patients, away from cases that don't have these diseases. And they actually went as far to create an infectious disease hospital just for the flu. Now, some of the things that he expected, there will be no visitors. We're not going to have people coming, family and stuff. I'm sorry, but if you visit, you'll take it out. And some of the same things we're doing today. If you're that ill, we cannot let you have visitors because you'll spread the disease. They were basically isolated. The staffs never met. They never matched. This staff never went into the non-infectious disease hospital. The whole community came together and provided the beds and the plumbing, and they turned this mansion into a hospital. They were so successful with their techniques in treating, they didn't lose one patient. There was one child that died who came in almost 2 to 3 weeks after she'd been sick, and they kept her alive for a month, but she finally succumbed to the illness. But aside from that, they saved pretty much everybody that came in. And after a month, there was no need for the hospital anymore. So kind of fascinating.
That is fascinating. And the corollary between what we're doing now is quite amazing. So I've got this question. Maybe you don't know the answer. Did they wear face masks during that time?
um, Interestingly enough, I don't know that they did. I mean, they realized that by some of the things that they did do is they did graduate, and we're hearing different medical schools graduating some of the students like a month early so that
Uh-huh.
they could get to work right away. And these were some of the things that they were doing here at Kirksville at that time. It was kind of like, again, overkill, because what they realized was the effects in our rural area were not as great. We were prepared, but the number of cases I don't even think came to maybe 35 or so total. Now that's not to say people didn't get sick and died at home, but
Mhm.
those that actually came to the hospital were treated, cured, and went home.
So, there you've got these physicians treating the flu and their patients are doing better than other types of physicians. Was that sort of an immediate success that was going around the nation, or was it one of those gradual things that just looking back, people saw that? How did osteopathic medicine treatment during the Spanish flu affect it later on, over the
Well, and I
following
think
years?
that's and that's what was exciting about this was the fact that it went so quickly, and people talk. I mean, what kept osteopathic healthcare alive is the patients. It certainly wasn't the businessmen, the professor, and the lawyers. And even today, we sometimes wonder, you know, what made it survive was the patients. They felt they got good care, and so you can bet you can talk. It's like, well, who did you see? Well, so and so, and grandma and the kids all got fine. And who did you see? Well, we saw so and so, and they all died. It's kind of like so. I mean, it really was kind of a very there wasn't much to say. Is that and they actually did a poll of like like 1,600 osteopathic physicians reported how they treated and their success rate, and that really was part of our record. And it's been printed that our death rate was so minimum compared to the allopathic death rate, and that was published in papers. And so people want to know. Like today, they want to know. And the mansion wasn't Dr. Still's mansion. If you're familiar with Kirksville, if you know where the Greek, the Greek restaurant is, it's across from the Bank of Kirksville, kind of cattywampus at the corner of Franklin and Jefferson Street. That is where this mansion was. And it actually was a fraternity house. And they dumped out, they got the fraternity guys out. It was a turreted, beautiful mansion. And they got the fraternity guys out, refurbished it. And so it sat where the Greek restaurant is today.
Fascinating, fascinating. So, what can you tell us from your research were sort of the osteopathic maybe practices or philosophies that were used? I mean, we talked about rib raising during treating the Spanish epidemic and the flu there. Were there any other, osteopathic practices or philosophies that really stood out during the treatments during this time?
Well, and it might sound a little hokey, but osteopathic healthcare has always been body, mind, and spirit. And we get this from A.T. Still hanging out with his father, who not only was a physician treating the body, but he was a reverend treating the spirit and the mind. And what A.T. Still saw that even when it was hopeless, just the praying and coming together and rooting for the patient, they got better. They were optimistic. They believed they could get better, and they did. He said it was with the Shawnee Indian. He goes, the Indians didn't have really much medicine. I mean, a couple herb stuff, but mostly they did a little dance and they blew a little smoke. And because the weird thing, people got better. And so Dr. Still had a philosophy is you never tell a patient it's hopeless, because as soon as you do, it is. Now, you may tell the family members it doesn't look good, but the patient, you do not know that body's ability to heal. And we want them as optimistic. If they believe, he goes, my body was broken. I had the typhoid fever for 8 months and I was ready to die. I'd come up with this idea, osteopathic was going, and then I got sick and my body was broken and I just wanted to die. And I'm laying there thinking, I think I should die. And my wife, she comes up to me and she goes, do you want to die? Because if you do, go ahead. Because your 10-year-old son just got a paper job and we're going to be fine. So if you want to die, go. He still was like, oh my gosh, I was shamed. Here I'm thinking about myself and I'm not worried about my family. He said, I realized that I needed to get back to work. And so though the body was broken, I willed my spirit to get better. And I did, and I got back to work. Now, during that 8 months, we believe there was some probably nerve damage from those high fevers, and that caused a little bit of a balance problem. And that's when we first see the walking stick. And his boots that he always wear, he'd taken leather and he pushed them and he carved them so that his feet went towards the inner. When you bend your feet kind of like pigeon-toed, you actually have better balance. So he had these orthotics that he made with the walking stick, and he got back to work. But this is the idea of optimism. And I've been hearing this on the internet. People that should have possibly passed from this virus, who were no different than anyone else, they said, what made the difference with you? And this 88-year-old grandpa said, I could hear my grandchildren outside and I wanted to see them again. And I was going to see them again. And you hear these cases, even Cuomo from CNN. I'm not a big fan of Cuomo just as a person, but Cuomo said, I caught it and I just wanted to lay down and die. And I called my pulmonary doctor, probably was a DO, and he said, because there's a lot of DOs in New Jersey and New York. We got the Steinbaums and the Minces and all these different families. Anyway, he said, lift your arms up. Can you do that? He goes, well, it hurts. He goes, do it. Now breathe in. You go, oh, it hurts. Breathe in a couple of times and then stop. And I want you to start acting normal. And I want you to believe you are going to beat this. And so he does this little video clip and he talks about the power of the positive thinking of fighting this and winning. So all I'm saying is Dr. Still said it was very important because there was a student who was dying. And they didn't tell Dr. Still because they didn't want Dr. Still to know the student was dying. And so the family kept it quiet. But Dr. Still goes out and gets his walk every day. And you should too. Commune with nature, feel and breathe good air, exercise a little bit, and you get the gossip. And as he's walking around, someone says, it's too bad about that student, Asa Willard's going to die. A.T. Still says, what? Well, your student, he's dying. He's over at such and such. Well, A.T. Still beelines over there. He goes, oh, Asa? He goes, now he does a very simple treatment, nothing crazy, just puts things in alignment. And he basically says, you got a fever. Fever is healing. It's going to burn the disease out. So don't panic about the fever. But I think you're giving up. Are you quitting me? And he goes, if you're quitting me, there's no hope. But if you're going to stick with it, you're going to be fine. So Asa, are you quitting me? He goes, no, I'm not. He goes, you're going to be fine. And AT still walks away. And that student did get fine. Now, again, all I'm saying is, who knows, this body, mind, spirit, the spirit, as Dr. Still would say, don't even touch that body till you comprehend it houses a spirit. It's not about the body. It's about the spirit and what that spirit can do. And if you're not aware of that, you shouldn't be messing with that person. And so as we think about it, Dr. Still put a heavy emphasis on the uniqueness. We all have this spirit. And that's why he treated everybody equally, men, women, people of color. It's just like cars. They're all different. They're all sizes. They're all colors. But what's inside those cars are the drivers. And that's what's important. And what's inside these bodies is you, the spirit. And that's what's important.
Fascinating story, very fascinating, and kind of goes along. I remember when, COVID was first running rampant, particularly in places like Italy, and Spain and things like that. I remember reading those reports and people talking about, we had very little information about this disease at that time. And the one thing I saw many reports of was that positivity that was, when they were saying who's most likely to survive that. And one of the things they showed was it was the positive people and the people that were being positive. We still to this time frame don't have very good medicines to treat that. If you think of medicine as only being a pill that you can put inside someone's body. But if you think of osteopathic medicine and the mind, the body, and the spirit, and you realize that that is medicine as well, then yes, we have a lot to offer, despite not having any treatments or what we would call treatments available. We actually do have treatments, and it's easy for us to get into that rut where we think the only treatment we have is a pill or something that we can put in by IV. But we don't. We have a lot more to offer. Maybe that's why we did so good during this pandemic, is that they didn't have any treatments, period, that would have benefited that influenza as far as pills and IVs and stuff go. But they did have the philosophies, and they did have the practice. So that's wonderful. What great stories.
Well, Dr. Brown, you remind me that Dr. Still says, we have cases and we can't cure everything. Someone comes in with cerebral palsy and they would just bring people off the street, and he tells students, and this was a report. He goes, that person, cerebral palsy. That was a birth issue, lack of oxygen, there's some nerve damage. We can't take cerebral palsy away, but we could give them some quality of life. You can always make it better. You might not be able to cure it, but you can make it better. And sometimes even just that human interaction, we're known for our doctors basically having that patient rapport, and that's a lot, so again, you can always make it better. And so I appreciate your ideas on that, Dr. Brown.
Well, I want to circle just a little bit back. It's kind of jumping in what I want to talk about here, but we've already brought it up, and so I think it'd be a great time to introduce it. Dr. Still taught us to treat the mind, body, and spirit. That's what I was taught as a medical student, all these many years later. So my question is, he really focused on spirituality. Was there a specific religion that he followed that AT still practiced?
And one of the things, if we look at Bloom's taxonomy, Bloom had a lot of ideas about how we learn, how people do things. One thing, what Bloom said about us, and this is going to relate to what I'm going to say about Dr. Still, is that children, they basically understand kindness and cruelty. They recognize when you're kind and cruel, even before they can even speak and put sentences, they understand kindness and cruelty. The other thing is they understand fairness. If you give one child one piece and you give another child 3 pieces of candy, they understand equity and fairness. They also understand empathy of pain when someone suffers. And children want to calm and take away pain. When you look at these are the basics that every child knows. This is what Dr. Still talks about when he talks about his religion. Everybody wanted to know, well, your father was Methodist, are you Methodist, or are you Shawnee Indian something or other? What is your religion? And I'm going to pull this up because I think this is worthy of showing. So here we go. It's actually what Dr. Steele says. Oops, I, I, I keep picking the wrong. I have two things up and I picked the wrong one, so sorry about that. But I do think it's worth seeing what Dr. Steele had to say about religion. So here it is, and we will show it. Now, of course, oops, how did that happen? I am really bad at I mean, I've been doing these programs pretty good. And, okay, here it is. This is what I wanted you guys to, oh, why did it do that? I'm going to escape. I'm just going to read it here. So what we've got here is Dr. Stills. We have what Dr. Can everybody see this now? Michael, you're going to have to give me.
You're not sharing yet. We're still seeing your bright smiley face.
Oh, well, that's too bad. Here it is. Now, oops, now there it is. Now can you see it?
Yep, there we go.
My religion. So everybody's always asking Dr. Steele what his religion is. And one of the things he says, I won't really have any religion till we understand every person has a soul. But what he says here is, my religion is love and justice to all. Isn't that what Bloom's taxonomy? Kindness and fairness. And I love and adore all the works of nature. And I love the heavens and the harmonious perfection, and in the perfection of the world, the endless space, and then which we have the counter twirling heavens, and we have the satellites, and we have a million stars, and everything's working in harmony. So what Dr. Steele said was, love people, be fair, and appreciate nature. And so I do think that one of the things we're starting to see with this disease is, as we've kind of attacked nature for a long, long time, I think nature's kind of getting its revenge. What Dr. Steele would say is, if you have animals and humans and cramped and you're treating things really poorly, are you surprised that something bad happens? So as we have sheltered ourselves away, we've seen things like Venice. The waters have cleared. Fish are there. Porpoises are coming. In Brazil, the flamingos have returned to the cities, thousands of them. I mean, every day I see something that shows where nature, given the opportunity, will come back. So maybe when this is all over, we'll be treating nature hopefully a little better, because when you treat nature bad things happen. And we believe that the wet markets with animals and all this, it's not conditioned for human or animal, and bad things might happen. So yeah.
No, that's great, and that's very interesting to learn about him, and I love the tie-in to today's day and age. He's discovered, AT still discovered a lot of things during his lifetime. Can you tell us what his last discovery was before he passed away?
As he was looking at the spirit, he really started thinking about mental health and how we were treating people who weren't working in a normal function. And he felt that if we could work with them in an osteopathic way. And so he creates basically a sanitarium. And that is actually where people could recover. You know, depression because of death. Um, this person might be treated poorly, but their body is just recovering from a shock. And through socialization, through music, through diet, through exercise, what he discovered is, and using manipulation, that people got better. And sometimes it was just a simple thing as diet. We know that the photographers of that time, they were using their hands and working with cyanide in the photographic process. Well, the cyanide's leaching, it's heavy metal, they're going nuts. Dr. Steele put him on heavy fat, heavy milk diet, and it helped remove those metal residue from the brain, and they came back. And so we see the power of diet and socialization. And Dr. Steele said the greatest thing that we have done with osteopathic medicine is start to work with mental health. And certainly, even as we're friends are quarantined and stuff, we all, isolation, removal from humans, these are things that typically cause psychological problems. We have a lot of psychiatrists that says that almost every problem you can trace back to an interpersonal relationship. It's not things, it's people that cause us to hurt and have problems. So as we look at what Dr. Steele was doing, treating people with kindness and bringing them back, And the great thing is this worked for many years. They started this in 1914 and all the way through mid-1960s. And then we came up with psychotropic drugs, and we said we've got everything we need. Well, now we're coming back and saying, yeah, I don't think that's it. And now we're going back to the very things that Dr. Still was using at the Still Hildreth, diets and things with autism and all kinds of different issues. We're finding that there's ways we can help without necessarily medications. Granted, medications have their point, but what we're saying is if you can do it without, Dr. Still always was, let's go in at the lowest level. If we can manipulate and make it work, great. If we have to use drugs, then drugs. And last, if we have to do a surgery, but I can't undo a surgery, so make sure it's required. But sometimes we need that too.
That's wonderful. As a family physician, I feel like my treatment has been, of all my patients that are in quarantine and social isolation, has been not medicines, but it's been, hey, get an hour of sunlight every day. Get out and exercise. Social distancing does not mean that you can't get out and get a walk, be safe. And I feel like I'm prescribing that more than I am any kind of medicine. But I feel like, that's been my small contribution to my community is while the sick cases are in the hospital, I'm treating this community that's in isolation. And as you're right, human beings are social animals, and my patients have not been doing very well being isolated. And so my prescriptions have been those simple things, not pills. In fact, I don't think I've really started any patients on antidepressants during this time. I've started them on the solution for the problem, which is get back to being social, whether it be through social media or social distancing, but safely. And then also to, get some of that sun. I tell them, get 30 minutes of sun in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon. If you're like me, wear some sunscreen. But that's been my prescription for them during this. And I do credit that back to my osteopathic roots, which is to think about the whole person, not jump to the pills or those kind of easy, quick treatments. Find the solution that will cure the problem, not just treat the symptom.
Well, kudos to you, because if you can change their thinking, you change their feelings. If they're thinking, I'm isolated, I'm trapped, blah, blah. And that's why Dr. Still said every day we should all go outside and commute. We are part of nature, and it heals us. Whether it's just a walk, in the yard, or if you can get to a beach, or if you can get into a woods, but do something that lets just you connect to your natural affinity. If we isolate ourselves, pretty soon nature becomes our enemy. And we need to be part of it, breathing it, experience it, tasting it, gardening a little bit. As you say, do something productive, and you'll stop thinking about the issues of not being able to do. What can you do, not what can't you do? So good advice, good doctoring.
Well, hey, so my last question for you for this little meeting here is that if A.T. Still were still teaching in Kirksville today, what do you think he would be telling our medical students today who are about to go out and treat patients with COVID-19?
I think he would remind them that osteopathic healthcare, it's not manipulation. It's not a variety of things. It is health. And whatever that is your patient needs to bring them towards health. So maybe it is more exercise if they've got a few pounds. Maybe it is more socializing if they're having mental health. But you treat the whole person. And so remember, it's about health. Are you as healthy as you can be? And what we're finding is that people, as they catch this virus, and they say eventually until we have a vaccine, ultimately everybody may catch this virus. Your best defense is always health. And then your body's prepared, because disease is natural. The virus is a living thing. It's just doing its thing like grass and trees. We don't like it. But again, we're going to have disease. It will always come. But the best way to work with it is to be at the point of your health. And about 4 years ago, I myself took off 30 pounds, started changing my diet. I feel better. I sleep better. I'm at a better peak than I was at 45. And so finding health in your patients, and you need to be a role model. You're your first patient. So if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to take care of anybody else? And so again, work on yourself. But I've started, you hear these things enough, it's a shame not to do them. And so I've listened to Dr. Still, and I've even grown his beard. Those who have known me, it's like, where'd that come from? My wife looked at it, she goes, it's gray. It's like, yeah, do you like it? She goes, it's gray. It's like, I'm an old man. It's gray. But I feel better. Like Dr. Still, he was climbing trees in his 80s. There was no change of his life. And so this is what health brings you. Now, your body's going to wear out. As he says, it'll fall apart, it'll rot, it'll burn up. But we come in a spirit, we build this body, we live in this body to get this life experience, and then we go to higher knowledge. So we're not going to stop death, but if we have health, we can procrastinate it.
Well, hey, at this time, we kind of want to open up to some questions to those of you that are on this chat. We've got about a little over 30 of you here, and we'd love to hear from you. What kind of questions do you have for Jason here? We've got a living expert on this man, and sitting right here, and maybe what kind of questions do you have?
Well, Dr. Brown, you too have some wonderful experiences and maybe stories.
Feel free to type those in the chat while people are doing that. Jason, I guess I've got a question for you. After Jason Haxton, who's going to be left in the world to teach us about all these teachings of AT Still? Are you planning on recording these down, or do you have an understudy, or what's gonna happen to our history?
Well, we were just talking about that. So like Dr. Still, we're all going to burn up and rot and move on. And I'm going to procrastinate it, but it is going to come.
Well,
but I've been
osteopathic medicine to keep you alive as long as
as long as possible. But what I'm doing is actually have an assistant director who's quite talented, and this was our conversation just 3 days ago, is how can we start getting her more involved? And actually, if we do this again, I'd like to introduce Heather Rudy, so that you start to see also the face of whether I retire or whatever. And I also want to write the definitive book on Dr. Still. And so that all these things that I've learned, that we can present these. But this is a lot like theater. When you're doing something live, there's always seeing it the first time. You can videotape this and it's fine, but it's like why we like to go to a musical or to the orchestra. There's something about the live performance that Dr. Brown and I are doing today that makes it a little more exciting. And so we will put all this information down, but as long as I can, I love telling these stories. So.
Well, yeah, no, that's great. And, somebody asked here, are you planning on writing your great osteopathic history text? So, we're expecting that to come out here soon.
Okay, well, I've written the children's book. I did write the book for 10 to 12-year-olds, so that's the start.
Absolutely. No, that's the contributions are great. And it just helps us to understand our history and our roots. It helps us to be able to, for me, what's fascinating is because, I think sometimes that the things that I'm coming up with are new. And then, I listen to your stories and I realize, oh, no, they were ingrained into me as a student. I never thought much of them at that time. But, now as a practicing physician, I just realized how valuable it was to have that foundation of these philosophies and these practices. So.
And they're simple ideas, but they make the difference. And that's what we're looking always for, something complicated. AT Still would tell us long-lived animals eat few things and not very much, so I will eat and try. He also said everything in moderation. The body can take anything in moderation. It's when we don't do moderation. Buffets, he never wanted a buffet. Now, I'll be honest, I like a good buffet, or at least once in a while, but I get it. Little meals all day long. I mean, these changes in our diet and our perceptions can make us healthier. But there is a question that I think is kind of about the absence of DOs treating sick patients. Can you answer to that, Dr. Brown? Do you have connections?
I don't know, because I couldn't answer that simply because I don't know what the numbers are, in treating sick patients. I will tell you that, with my relationship with MAOPS, most of the people I talk to are DOs treating COVID-19. So I know we have lots of our physicians treating it right now. What relative we have, I think it also depends on location. The outbreaks are mainly in New York and other large areas. The state of Missouri, while we've had a large outbreak in St. Louis and we've had wonderful members of our organization treating COVID-19 over there. We, our relatively statistically, our numbers have been very few in Missouri compared to other places. So I think that may be part of it, is that we're just, it's just where the doctors are right now.
Well, and there is a good question about Dr. Still's depression after the death of his children and his wife. And he really did go into a funk. It was so bad that when he would return home and he was used to seeing his children look out the windows, he just boarded them up. He couldn't take it anymore, that feeling. But I think that's where he decided to do something, that no one should lose their wife and children. And that was really the impetus for finding a better form of health care. Now, I often said, did God have to take away my wife and kids to spur me to do something? And maybe he did, but it was a real painful way to do it. And the same with the Still Hildreth. Hildreth actually loses his wife. And A.T. Still's second wife, Mary Elvira, died 3 years later. And Hildreth, he's done. His wife's dead. There's nothing to do. And what A.T. Still says, Hildreth, you're still a young man, and we're going to build this sanitarium. And as you treat people with depression, you yourself will get better. So the whole concept of the sanitarium was for one person, but it helped tens of thousands. I feel like it's like, a Star Trek episode. The needs of one don't outweigh the needs of the many. Well, in this case, the needs of one were important, but it helped the many. So that's kind of fun.
And that kind of ties to Chris Bull's question about how we tie the philosophy of physician burnout within the epidemic. How do we, use our osteopathic philosophy to help us with physician burnout during the epidemic? I loved what you talked about. Dr. Still it sounded like he had a get to work philosophy to help us. So his cure for burnout was to get to work.
Change your thinking. Don't pity yourself. Stop wallowing in your self-pity. It's good for a while. Depression brings us help. When we're shut down, because of people care and they're kind and they feel your pain. So depression initially is good, but when it goes too long, it stops serving its purpose. And now we need to get back to work, as Dr. Still says, and use that spirit to start making an impact. Someone asked what my favorite story is. You want to hear a good story of Dr. Still? Because Dr. Still was soul to soul. If you were kind, he treated you kindly. But there always are jerks in the world. And there was this person who came to be treated at the school, and they wanted Dr. Still. They wanted no one else. And it's like, well, is Dr. Still really isn't seeing anybody? And it's like, well, no. His son, or he will consult us. No. I've got water on the brain, and I want Dr. Still to check me out. And he was being obnoxious and rude and loud, and the family didn't know what to do with him. And they finally went to Dr. Still, says, we got this patient and he won't stop and he wants you. And Dr. Still says, okay, I'll see him. So he goes and he sees the patient and he says, he goes, are you A.T. Still? I am Dr. A.T. Still. I got water on the brain. I want you to check it out. And A.T. Still's like, fine. Puts his hands on the brain. He said, no. Patient's like, I don't have water on the brain? No brain. The patient was like, who is this fool? Get him away from me. I'll see anybody but this man. And that's what Dr. Still wanted.
It reminds me of a dictation once. I had a great attending who was an osteopathic physician, and I won't name him on here because
name him.
But one of his dictations on a patient I was reading of his from the last time he saw her, and he said, Mrs. Smith is here today for XYZ, and frankly, she's a mess. And that was the open line. So, so that openness with the patient seems to not be unique. So, well, hey, I want to take this last question here because I really like it here from Anthony here that I think you're going to have to answer this one because you're up there in Kirksville. Are we still teaching these questions to these students even amidst social isolation? How are we passing this knowledge down to the next generation of osteopathic physicians?
Well, Anthony, hello. And you're having your national convention coming up, I think June 7th or so. I get to be a speaker. So I'm going to be videotaping myself. And if you go to your convention, your main convention, you'll get to see me again. But we are still telling these stories. One is actually on ATSU's Museum Minute. So during this isolation, we've already done 4 of these minutes, and they're kind of fun. They're on the AT Still website, and it ties today with yesteryear. And so they're kind of fun things to do. And we have a student history and philosophy group called Say Hops. And we read the works of Dr. Still, kind of like a book review and share. And we travel to the sites in Kansas and go on road trips. And so there really is a lot going on to keep the stories alive. And as Dr. Brown knows, you could go by and kiss the first school every day and kick the cabin if you want. What I'm saying is there's pictures of Dr. Still. People say you can't go 3 feet without Dr. Still looking at you. So the good thing is we're kind of entrenched in that history in Kirksville. I wish other schools had it as much as our graduates did, because they really do have a love of it. So thanks so much, Anthony.
Well, thank you everybody for participating on this, and thank you, Jason, for your knowledge as always. Please be sure to leave us feedback. You'll get surveys, and please let us know how you like this. We're looking at maybe bringing Jason back a few times. There's so much more we can talk about with AT Still. I feel like we just scratched the surface here. And I feel like maybe I've become an older physician when I'm starting to look much more back into my history. As a student, you're just looking forward. What's the new thing I can learn? What's the next thing? What's the latest technology? Now I find myself reflecting more, wanting to know more about the oldest thing I could learn about my first what's the tried and the true, that stood the test of time. So thank you for being able to provide that for us. You play such a key role in the ongoing profession of osteopathic medicine. So thank you, and thank you everybody for participating. And like I said, please feel free to leave us feedback. Feel free to contact me or Jason and let us know. And we would love to keep things like this going.
I want to give one shout out, Dr. Brown.
Sure.
Dean Margaret Wilson, our family physician, like you've been for families for, my kids are 29, so at least 29 years, and now the most amazing dean. But here's the cool thing. When Dr. Still let women into the profession, it wasn't just as a token thing. He expected them to do the toughest job. And you find, particularly in the osteopathic schools, deans that are women. And that is an interesting thing. And I think it's, as Dr. Still said, they bring something unique and something we need. And we have benefited so much from the KCOM dean, Margaret Wilson. So I do want to, she's watching in, and I just want to give her a shout out.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I would add my commentary there. Dr. Wilson was my first example of a family physician, and here I am, a practicing one today. So we've all benefited from her and from her example. And I don't even get paid, but she's not my boss, so I can. So, well, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody. You all have a wonderful evening.